What if Atlantis didn't fall because of war or human weakness, but because its greatest power source failed? What if a single technology, a crystal-like device, once powered the most advanced civilization the world has ever known? Picture this. An island of golden towers and gleaming spires vanishes in a single catastrophic night, swallowed by the ocean, not because of invasion, but because the very energy that sustained the entire civilization spiraled out of control. The walls that protected them became a tomb. The power that elevated them to godlike status became their executioner. Ancient texts whisper of this mysterious technology. Modern researchers have theories. Could there be truth hidden beneath 2,000 years of legend and myth? Tonight, we dive deeper into the mystery. We explore not just what Atlantis was, but how it fell, and specifically, what role did an advanced crystal-based energy source play in the greatest collapse of human civilization? Around 2,400 years ago, the sun sets over the marble columns of Athens, casting long, orange shadows across the city that birthed the very concept of reason. In this world of philosophers and poets, a man named Plato sits to write. He is not merely recording history as we know it, but rather he is opening the door to a memory that the world had seemingly forgotten. This is where our journey truly begins, not in the depths of the ocean, but in the flickering light of an ancient study. Tonight, we settle into the silence of the past to hear the whispers of a civilization that supposedly existed 9,000 years before the time of the Greeks. Plato invites us to consider a world so magnificent and so technologically profound that it challenges every boundary of what we believe our ancestors were capable of achieving. Welcome to a deep exploration of the golden age of Atlantis, as told through the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias. To understand Atlantis, we must first understand how the story reached Plato. It was not a tale of his own invention, or so he claimed. He tells us that the great Athenian lawmaker, Solon, traveled to the land of Egypt centuries earlier. There, in the city of Sais, Solon met with priests who held the records of ages long gone. These priests looked upon the Greeks as children, people with short memories who had forgotten the many destructions that had wiped the slate of humanity clean. They spoke of a time when the world was different, and they described an island empire situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules. To the ancients, these pillars were the limit of the known world. The rocky gates were now called the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond that point lay the vast, untamed Atlantic, and it was there, according to the Egyptian records, that the most powerful empire in history once stood. Imagine a landmass larger than Libya and Asia combined. This was no mere island, but a continent of staggering abundance. The priest described a fertile plain that was surrounded by towering mountains, peaks that reached for the heavens and sheltered the land from the cold northern winds. These mountains were famous for their beauty and their number, housing wealthy villages, rivers, lakes, and meadows that provided enough food for every creature imaginable. There were even elephants, Plato tells us, suggesting a climate and a scale of wildlife that feels exotic and prehistoric. The land was rich with minerals and metals, but one substance stood above all others. This was orichalcum, a mysterious metal that flashed with a red light, mined directly from the earth. It was considered the second most precious metal in existence, trailing only gold in its value. To the people of Atlantis, orichalcum was not just a resource, it was the very skin of their civilization, used to coat the walls of their greatest monuments. At the center of this vast continent lay the capital city, a masterpiece of engineering that feels more like a vision from the future than a relic of the past. The city was built in a series of concentric circles, a design that balanced the elements of water and land in perfect harmony. There were 3 rings of water and 2 of land, alternating around the central island. This was not a natural formation, but a result of incredible labor and planning. The Atlanteans cut massive canals to connect these rings, allowing ships to sail from the outer sea all the way to the heart of the metropolis. They built bridges that spanned the rings of water, creating a network of transportation that allowed the city to pulse with life. The sheer scale of the construction is breathtaking. They carved tunnels through the land rings so that their great triremes, their powerful ships, could pass beneath, making the city a fortress of both commerce and defense. As we walk through the streets of this imagined capital, we see walls that shimmer under the sun. The outermost wall was coated in brass, the second in tin, and the innermost wall, which encircled the citadel, flashed with a fiery glow of orichalcum. This was a society that had mastered metallurgy to a degree that we are only beginning to understand. But the true heart of the city was a central island, where the palace and the main temple stood. The architecture was a blend of red, white, and black stone, quarried from the depths of the island itself. The buildings were not just functional. They were expressions of beauty and power, decorated with gold, silver, and the ever-present orichalcum. Dominating the central island was a great temple of Poseidon. This was a place of awe, 1,000 feet long and 300 feet wide, its exterior covered entirely in silver, with the pinnacles glowing in gold. Inside, the ceiling was made of solid ivory, decorated with gold, silver, and orichalcum. But it was the statue of the god itself that commanded the most attention. Poseidon was depicted standing in a chariot, driving 6 winged horses, a figure so tall that his head touched the ceiling. Surrounding him were 100 nereids riding on dolphins, all crafted from the most precious materials the world could offer. This temple was a spiritual anchor of the empire, a place where the divine lineage of the Atlanteans was honored with a splendor that would make the temples of Athens or Rome look like humble dwellings. The society of Atlantis was as organized as its architecture. It was divided into 10 kingdoms, each ruled by a descendant of Poseidon. The first and greatest was Atlas, who gave his name to the island and the ocean that surrounded it. These 10 kings governed with a sense of justice and wisdom that defined their golden age. They were bound by the laws of Poseidon, which were inscribed on a pillar of orichalcum located in the center of the island. Every 5 or 6 years, the kings would gather to consult on public affairs and to judge any who had broken the law. This gathering was a sacred ritual involving the sacrifice of a bull, a ceremony that connected the rulers to the earth and to the gods. During these times, they would put on azure robes and sit in judgment by the light of a dying fire, ensuring that the harmony of the island was maintained. For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, the people of Atlantis were obedient to the laws and well affected toward the gods. They possessed true and in every way great spirits, uniting gentleness with wisdom. They despised everything but virtue, and they cared little for their vast wealth, viewing gold and property as a burden rather than a prize. They were not intoxicated by luxury, nor did their wealth deprive them of self-control. They saw clearly that all these goods are increased by outward friendship and virtue, and that by a too eager pursuit of them, the virtue is lost. This was a true golden age, a time when humanity lived in balance with nature, technology, and the divine. They built docks, harbors, and gymnasiums. They created a navy of 1,200 ships and an army of nearly 1 million men. Yet, their greatest strength was not their military, but their character. But as the centuries passed, the story takes a darker turn. Plato explains that the divine portion within them began to fade, diluted by too much of the mortal admixture. The Atlanteans grew drunk on their own power. They became ambitious and greedy, and though they still appeared glorious to the outside world, they were inwardly filled with unrighteousness and arrogance. They began to look toward the east, seeking to conquer the Mediterranean and enslave the nations that live within the Pillars of Hercules. It was this shift, this fall from grace, that set the stage for the final tragedy. They had moved from being a beacon of wisdom to being a force of destruction, and the gods, observing this corruption, prepared a reckoning. As we reflect on Plato's words, we have to ask why he shared this story with such meticulous detail. He gave us dimensions, colors, and specific laws. Was he merely crafting a myth to explain his political theories? Or was he passing on a fragment of a true history that had been lost to the waves? Some see the concentric rings of Atlantis as a blueprint for a perfect society, while others see them as a memory of an advanced maritime civilization that was destroyed at the end of the last ice age. The specificity of the metals and the engineering suggests a level of sophistication that feels out of place in the traditional timeline of history. If Atlantis existed 9,000 years before Plato, it would have been at the height of its power while most of humanity was just beginning to settle into small villages. Tonight, as the waves of history wash over us, we can almost see the red glow of the orichalcum walls and hear the sound of the great triremes moving through the canals. The whispers of Plato are more than just words on a page. They are a glimpse into a golden age that challenges our understanding of who we are and where we came from. Whether Atlantis was a real land or a beautiful dream, it serves as a reminder of the heights humanity can reach when we live in harmony, and the depths to which we can fall when we lose our way. We linger here in the golden light of the capital city, marveling at the winged horses of Poseidon and the wisdom of the 10 kings, before the shadows of the coming cataclysm begin to grow. The story of Atlantis is a story of a paradise lost, but in the telling, we find a treasure that no ocean can truly hide. In the next stage of our journey, we will look closer at the world as it was, and the incredible artifact that suggests the legend might be closer to the truth than anyone dared to imagine. For now, let the image of the ringed city fill your mind, a shimmering beacon of gold and stone, standing proud against the vast, blue horizon of a forgotten world. To understand Atlantis, we must look beyond the myth and into the very blueprints of its existence. Plato describes a city that was not merely a collection of buildings, but a living, breathing machine of stone and water. Imagine the sheer audacity of a people who decided to reshape the very earth into perfect circles. This was the capital of the Atlantean Empire, a city designed with a geometric precision that seems to defy the tools of the ancient world. At its center was a small hill, the legendary home of Cleito, the woman who captured the heart of Poseidon. To protect her, the god carved out the earth, creating 3 rings of sea water and 2 rings of land, alternating in a pattern that looked like a giant bullseye from the heavens. These were not just shallow moats. They were deep, navigable waterways, wide enough for the largest ships of the age to pass through. But how did they achieve such perfect symmetry? How did they move millions of tons of earth and rock without the heavy machinery we rely on today? Some suggest they possess a knowledge of mathematics and physics that has since been lost to the tides of time. Others whisper of a more mysterious influence, a guiding from forces that understood the harmony of the spheres. As we stand on the outermost ring, the air is thick with the scent of salt and the sound of 1,000 oars rhythmically hitting the water. This was a gateway to the world, a harbor that never slept, where the wealth of distant continents flowed into the heart of the empire. The engineering of Atlantis began at the shore. Plato tells us of a massive canal, 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep, stretching for 50 stadia, which is about 9 kilometers, from the sea to the outermost ring. This was no mere ditch. It was a feat of hydraulic engineering that allowed the largest vessels to sail directly into the city, creating a port that was always bustling, always alive. Imagine the sight of these great ships, their sails catching the Atlantic breeze as they glided between towering stone walls, entering a metropolis that felt like the center of the universe. To connect the rings of land, the Atlanteans built bridges of staggering beauty and strength. These were not simple wooden crossings. They were massive stone structures, wide enough for chariots and horses to pass, while underneath, They carve out tunnels through the land rings so that ships could pass from one circle of water to the next. Picture the ingenuity required to support a bustling city street above while triremes and merchant ships sail through the dark, cool tunnels below. This layered approach to transit suggests a society that prioritized flow and efficiency, a hallmark of what we would today call a smart city. The walls of these tunnels and bridges were not left bare. They were crafted from stone quarried from the heart of the island itself, stone that came in 3 distinct colors: red, white, and black. This use of multicolored stone was more than just a decorative choice. It created a visual rhythm that defined the city. Imagine the sun setting over the capital, the light catching the alternating bands of crimson and obsidian rock, making the entire city appear to glow with an inner fire. But the Atlanteans did not stop at stone. They were masters of metallurgy, and they used their wealth to coat the very walls of their city in shimmering metals. The outermost wall, encircling the first ring, was covered in a layer of brass, gleaming like gold in the midday sun. The inner wall was coated in tin, bright and silver, reflecting the moon on the water. But it was a wall of the innermost citadel that truly captured the imagination. It was coated in orichalcum, a mysterious metal that Plato tells us was second only to gold in value. What was this orichalcum? Its name literally means mountain copper, yet its description suggests something far more exotic. Some say it was a natural alloy of gold and copper, while others believe it was a substance we have no name for today, a metal that could hold an edge sharper than steel and glow with a light of its own. Imagine walking through the central island, where the walls sparkle with the reddish light of this legendary metal, creating an atmosphere that felt more divine than human. This was the heart of the empire, where the palace of the kings and the great temple of Poseidon stood. The infrastructure of Atlantis was equally impressive beneath the surface. Plato describes a sophisticated system of water management that would make a modern engineer marvel. The Atlanteans harnessed the natural gifts of their volcanic island, tapping into both cold and hot springs that bubbled up from the earth. They channeled these waters into magnificent baths and fountains, ensuring that every citizen had access to fresh, clean water. There were separate baths for the kings and for private individuals, and even specific pools for women and for horses and cattle. The wastewater was not wasted. It was diverted to irrigate the beautiful gardens and groves of trees that grew on the rings of land, keeping the city lush and green even in the height of summer. Beyond the rings of the city, the engineering of Atlantis extended into a vast, fertile plain. This plain was a rectangular marvel of irrigation, surrounded by a great ditch that collected water from the mountains. This ditch was 100 feet deep and 600 feet wide, stretching for 10,000 stadia around the entire plain. From this primary canal, smaller channels were cut in straight lines, creating a grid that allowed for the transport of timber and produce from the mountains to the city. This grid system suggests a level of land management and agricultural planning that was thousands of years ahead of its time. The plain was divided into 60,000 lots, each overseen by a leader who was responsible for providing men and equipment for the military. This was a society organized with the precision of a clock, where engineering served the needs of both the spirit and the state. At the very center of the capital stood the Temple of Poseidon, a structure that defied the limits of architecture. It was a stadium in length and half a stadium in width, with an exterior covered entirely in silver and its pinnacles in gold. Inside, the ceiling was made of ivory, variegated with gold and silver and orichalcum. But the centerpiece was a golden statue of the god himself, standing in a chariot and driving 6 winged horses, a statue so tall its head touched the ceiling. Surrounding him were 100 nereids riding on dolphins, a testament to the artistic and technical skill of the Atlantean craftsmen. In this temple, the 10 kings of the island would gather every 5 or 6 years to consult the laws inscribed by Poseidon on a pillar of orichalcum. The story of the 10 kings is central to the Atlantean identity. They were the descendants of the 5 pairs of twin sons born to Poseidon and Cleito, with Atlas, the eldest, being the supreme king. Each king ruled over his own territory and city, but they were bound together by the laws of the sea god. These laws forbade them from ever taking up arms against one another, and required them to come to each other's aid if any one of their kingdoms faced rebellion. Imagine these 10 rulers, dressed in robes of azure, meeting at night around the pillar of orichalcum to settle disputes and renew their oaths. It was a system designed for stability and harmony, a political mirror to the perfect circles of their city. But why go to such lengths? Why build such complex rings and tunnels? Why coat walls in precious metals? The engineering of Atlantis was a statement of power and a reflection of a world that saw no boundary between the natural and the divine. They believed they were building a paradise on Earth, a place where the elements of stone, water, and metal were brought into perfect alignment. Their canals were not just for trade. They were the veins of a living god. Their walls were not just a defense. They were the armor of a holy kingdom. As we look at the scale of their achievements, the question remains, could such a place have truly existed? Could the Bronze Age have produced engineers capable of moving mountains and taming the sea? Or was Plato describing a technology that was even older, a remnant of forgotten epoch of humanity that achieved greatness long before the first pyramids were ever dreamed of? The precision of the rings, the sophistication of the plumbing, and the mastery of metallurgy all point toward a civilization that had moved far beyond the primitive. Think of the silence that must have fallen over the city at night, the only sound being the gentle lap of water against the orichalcum walls and the distant hum of the harbor. This was a city that felt invincible, a fortress of ingenuity and wealth. Yet, the very engineering that made it great may have played a role in its eventual tragedy. The deep canals, the massive stone structures, the manipulation of the island's volcanic terrain. These were all gambles against the power of nature. In the end, the perfect circles of Atlantis were not enough to hold back the wrath of the earth. But before we reach the end of the story, we must walk through the streets of this golden city once more and feel the weight of its stones and the brilliance of its bronze. For in the engineering of the ringed city, we find the ultimate expression of the human desire to create something eternal, even if it was destined to be swallowed by the deep. For now, let the geometry of this lost world settle in your mind, a vision of what we might have once been. For now, we rest in the shadow of the great pillar, waiting for the tides to turn. Imagine a world where the very walls of the city pulse with a light that seemed to come from within. A place where the boundaries between magic and machinery were not just blurred, but non-existent. In our journey through the echoes of Atlantis, we have seen its golden temples and its vast empire. But what if the true wonder of this lost world was something invisible? Something that hummed in the air and glowed in the dark? Tonight, we peer into the heart of the Atlantean machine, exploring the substance that made their city shimmer and the power that may have fueled their rise to the stars. Orichalcum, the legendary metal that Plato described as the second most precious material in existence, holds the key to this mystery. What was it? A simple alloy of copper and gold, or a material with properties that modern science is only beginning to understand? Plato tells us that the walls of the capital were coated in 3 different metals. The outermost wall was covered in brass, the middle wall in tin, and the innermost wall, which encircled the citadel and the temple of Poseidon, was coated in orichalcum. He describes this substance as flashing with a red light, a fiery glow that gave the heart of the city an unearthly radiance. For centuries, scholars have dismissed orichalcum as a poetic invention or perhaps a rare form of mountain copper. Some point to a shipwreck found off the coast of Sicily, where ingots of a golden-colored alloy were recovered and identified as a mix of copper and zinc. But could there be more to the story? In the secret histories and fringe theories that haunt our imagination, orichalcum was more than just a decorative metal. It was a conductor, a material capable of channeling vast amounts of energy with zero resistance? What if the red glow of the inner walls was not just a reflection of the sun, but the result of energy passing through a superconductive grid? Imagine the city of Atlantis as a giant circuit, with concentric rings of water and land acting as a massive resonator. The canals were not just for transport, and the walls were not just for defense. They were components of a power plant that spanned the entire island. Some researchers suggest that the Atlanteans had mastered the science of vibration and resonance, using the orichalcum-clad walls to capture the natural frequencies of the earth and the sea. This was a civilization that did not rely on the burning of wood or oil. They harvested the very pulse of the planet, a clean and infinite source of power that illuminated their streets and powered their ships. The mystery of Atlantean power takes a deeper turn when we consider the accounts of the great crystals. While Plato does not explicitly mention them, a persistent thread in the legends of Atlantis, most notably in the readings of the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, speaks of the Firestone or the Tuaui Stone. This was described as a massive, multifaceted crystal housed in a central dome, capable of concentrating the rays of the sun and the stars into a beam of immense power. Imagine a prism so perfect, so pure, that it could generate enough energy to sustain an entire continent. This crystal was said to be the heartbeat of Atlantis, the source of its technological superiority and its mastery over the elements. It provided heat, light, and even a form of wireless energy that could be transmitted to the furthest corners of the empire. But with great power comes a terrible risk. The legend suggests that this same energy source, which brought Atlantis to its pinnacle, may have also been the instrument of its destruction. What if the Firestone grew too potent? What if the Atlanteans, in their hubris, attempted to push the limits of the celestial energy, causing a catastrophic failure that tore the very foundations of the island asunder? Modern science knows that crystals can store and transmit data, and we use them in everything from watches to computers. Is it so far-fetched to believe that an ancient society, perhaps one with knowledge given to them by visitors from beyond our world, could have unlocked secrets of crystalline resonance that we are only now beginning to glimpse? Consider the architecture of the city once more. The rings of water were not stagnant. They were part of a sophisticated hydraulic system. Some believe the Atlanteans used the ebb and flow of the tides, combined with the geothermal heat from beneath the island, to create a constant cycle of pressure and steam. This was a world of steam-powered elevators, automated gates, and perhaps even flying craft that move without a sound, propelled by the interaction between the orichalcum grids and the magnetic field of the earth. When we look at the ruins of other ancient civilizations, like the massive stones of Baalbek or the precision-cut granite of Egypt, we often ask how they were moved. The answer might lie in the lost secrets of Atlantis, a science of anti-gravity and sound frequency that allowed the impossible to become reality. The temples of Atlantis were not just places of worship, but centers of learning and research. The Temple of Poseidon, with its golden statue and its orichalcum pillars, may have served as a main control center for the city's energy grid. Imagine the priests of Atlantis as the first scientists, guardians of a technology that felt like magic to the uninitiated. They understood the relationship between geometry and energy, building their temples on ley lines and alignment points that connected the earth to the celestial bodies above. This was a holistic science, one that blended the spiritual with the physical. For the Atlanteans, there was no separation between the soul and the machine. Everything was vibration, and they had learned to play the music of the universe. Why did this knowledge vanish so completely? Why do we find no circuit boards, no engines, no remnants of the supposed superscience? The answer may lie in the nature of the energy itself. If the Atlanteans used biological or crystalline technology, it would not leave the same kind of metallic waste that our modern industries do. A crystal shattered into dust is just sand. a biological machine would decompose back into the Earth. If their power was based on resonance and frequency, it would leave no trace at all once the source was silenced. The single day and night of destruction described by Plato would have been enough to reset the world to zero, turning a high-tech utopia into a wasteland of mud and myth in a matter of hours. As we dwell on the image of the red gleaming walls and the humming power of the firestone, we must ask ourselves what we have lost. Is it possible that the myths of alchemy, the search for the philosopher's stone, and the stories of magical metals are all garbled memories of this lost Atlantean science? The alchemists spoke of a material that could transform and empower, a substance that was more valuable than gold. Could this be the orichalcum of old, a superconductor that was the foundation of a global network of energy? The clues are scattered across our history, in the golden caps of the pyramids and the mysterious bronze mechanisms found in ancient shipwrecks. They point toward a past that was not primitive, but perhaps more advanced in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. The legacy of Atlantean energy is a warning and a promise. It tells us of a time when humanity touched the divine and wielded the power of the sun. But it also speaks of the dangers of unchecked ambition. The Atlanteans, for all their wisdom, became victims of their own success. Their technology, meant to harmonize with nature, eventually sought to dominate it. And nature, as the story tells us, responded with a fury that no machine could withstand. The sinking of Atlantis was not just a geological event. It was a failure of the balance between knowledge and virtue. As we search for the ruins of this great civilization, we are really searching for those lost secrets, the keys to a power that could save us or destroy us once again. Let your mind drift to the central citadel of Atlantis at night. The city is not dark. It is bathed in the soft, pulsating red light of the orichalcum walls. The sound of the city is not a roar of engines, but a low, rhythmic hum, the sound of the earth breathing through the great crystal. Ships glide through the canals, silent as shadows, their hulls glowing with the same reflected fire. In the distance, the fertile plains are green and lush, fed by automated irrigation systems that have worked for 1,000 years. It is a world of peace, of abundance, and of impossible light. This is a vision that keeps us searching. This is a secret that whispers to us through the ages, telling us that once we were giants. In our next chapter, we will look closer at the people of this world, the kings and the citizens who walk these shimmering streets. We will explore their laws, their rituals, and the strange divine lineage that supposedly gave them their extraordinary abilities. If their technology was touched by the gods, what of their blood? Join me as we step into the life of an Atlantean, seeking to understand the mind behind the machine. The shadows of the past are deep, but the light of orichalcum still flashes in our dreams, guiding us toward a truth that has been waiting in the dark for over 10,000 years. Rest now, in the glow of the red metal, and let the pulse of the lost city lead you into a deep and peaceful sleep. For though the island has sunk, the fire of its spirit remains, waiting for the dawn to rise again. Imagine a horizon that does not mark an end, but a beginning. For the citizens of Atlantis, the vast, churning expanse of the Atlantic was not a source of fear, but a realm of infinite potential. They were the sovereigns of the deep, a maritime empire whose influence rippled across the ancient world like the wake of a monolithic vessel. In the dialogues of Plato, we are introduced to a society whose naval reach was unmatched, a thalassocracy that held the keys to the Mediterranean and the Atlantic alike. But what was the secret to their dominance? Was it simply a matter of superior numbers, or did the Atlanteans possess a maritime science so advanced it bordered on the miraculous? Tonight, we step onto the sun-drenched docks of their great capital, feeling the salt spray on our faces as we explore the naval heart of a lost superpower. Greetings, seekers of the unknown, as we continue our descent into the mystery of history for sleep. I am Mr. H, your guide through these ancient currents, where the truth is often submerged beneath layers of myth and time. To understand Atlantis, one must understand its relationship with the water. While other civilizations looked to the earth for stability, the Atlanteans looked to the waves for power. Plato describes a capital city designed around water, with 3 concentric rings of harbors that served as the primary arteries of their civilization. This was not a city that happened to have a port. It was a port that had become a city. The outermost ring was a bustling hive of activity, a world within a world where ships from every corner of their vast empire gathered. Imagine the sight of thousands of vessels, their hulls painted in vibrant hues, their sails catching the Atlantic breeze as they navigated the precise canals. The sheer scale of this maritime infrastructure is staggering. The Great Canal, nearly 9 kilometers long and 100 meters wide, was a marvel of hydraulic engineering, deep enough to carry the largest ships of the era. It was a gateway that connected the heart of the empire to the pulse of the ocean. But what of the ships themselves? In our modern understanding of ancient history, we often think of triremes made of cedar and oak, limited by the strength of rowers and the unpredictability of the wind. Yet, if Atlantis was as advanced as the legend suggests, their vessels must have been something more. What if their hulls were reinforced with orichalcum, that mysterious red metal that Plato claims was second only to gold? Imagine a fleet that gleamed like fire upon the water, its ships impervious to the rot and barnacles that plagued lesser navies. These were not merely boats. They were floating fortresses, capable of enduring the fierce storms of the open Atlantic that would have swallowed a Greek or Phoenician galley hull. Some theorists even wonder if they possess advanced navigational tools, perhaps early forms of the astrolabe, or even more mysterious instruments that allowed them to chart the stars with precision that made the entire globe their playground. Did they understand the trade winds and the deep ocean currents thousands of years before the age of discovery? The economic power of this maritime empire was rooted in its ability to control the flow of goods between continents. Atlantis was positioned beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the gateway we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. By holding this strategic point, they functioned as the ultimate gatekeepers of the ancient world. No vessel could pass from the Mediterranean into the mystery of the Atlantic without the leave of the Atlantean navy. This gave them a monopoly on the rarest resources of the time. They traded in metals, spices, and exotic woods, but they also traded in knowledge. Their ports were melting pots of culture, where the wisdom of the East met the innovation of the West. In the markets of the Outer Ring, one might find tin from the distant shores of Britain, ivory from the heart of Africa, and perhaps even stranger good from lands across the Western Sea that history has forgotten. The wealth generated by this trade was what allowed them to coat their walls in brass and tin, and to fill their temples with statues of solid gold. This maritime dominance was not merely for commerce. It was the backbone of their military might. Plato tells us that the 10 kings of Atlantis commanded a fleet of 1,200 ships, a force so massive it could overwhelm any rival by sheer weight of numbers and technology. This was a navy designed for projection, capable of landing armies on distant shores and maintaining supply lines that stretched across the horizon. Their influence reached into Libya as far as the borders of Egypt and into Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, the land we now call Italy. This was not a localized kingdom. It was a global superpower that viewed the ocean as its sovereign territory. The sailors of Atlantis were said to be the finest in history, trained from youth in the navigation of the deeps, their lives dictated by the tides and the sacred laws of Poseidon. They were the guardians of the blue frontier, and for centuries their word was law upon the waves. However, with such absolute power came an inevitable shift in the Atlantean character. The early generations, Plato suggests, used their maritime reach for the betterment of their society and the pursuit of wisdom. They were explorers and traders, bridges between worlds. But as the divine blood of Poseidon grew thin in their veins, their ambition turned toward conquest. The ships that once carried bread and knowledge began to carry iron and fire. They sought to subjugate the Mediterranean, to bring the virtuous city of Athens and the ancient priests of Egypt under their yoke. This transition from a peaceful thalassocracy to an aggressive empire is a classic story of hubris. They believed that because they ruled the sea, they were masters of destiny itself. They forgot that the ocean, which gave them their wealth and their walls, was a fickle master. But what happens when a society reaches the very limit of its potential, when the heights of achievement touch the ceiling of the heavens, and the only path left is down? We have marveled at the golden temples of Atlantis, its impossible technology, and the intricate rings of land and water that defined its capital. We have spoken of a civilization so advanced it seemed touched by the divine. But tonight, we must look close at the cracks in the golden facade, for even the most brilliant light casts a long and cooling shadow. This is a story of the shadow of hubris, a civilization at its breaking point, where the virtues of the past were slowly strangled by the ambitions of the future. Plato tells us that for many generations, as long as the divine nature of their ancestor Poseidon lasted in them, the people of Atlantis were obedient to the laws and well-affectioned toward the gods. They possessed a spirit that was at once true and great. They practiced gentleness and wisdom in the various chances of life and in their intercourse with one another. They thought lightly of the possession of gold and other property, which seemed only a burden to them. They were not intoxicated by luxury, nor did wealth deprive them of their self-control. But as the centuries passed, this divine element began to fade. It was diluted by the mortal nature that grew within them, like a slow poison seeping into a clear spring. The Atlanteans began to lose their way. They could no longer bear the burden of their own prosperity. To the bystander who had no eye to see the true happiness of life, they appeared at last to be at the very pinnacle of glory and wealth. But to those who could see with the eyes of the soul, they were becoming unseemly. The qualities that had made them great, their wisdom, their virtue, and their restraint, were being replaced by an unbridled ambition and a thirst for power that knew no bounds. Could it be that the very technology that made them masters of the world also became the catalyst for their destruction? As their machines grew more complex and their canals stretched further across the landscape, did they begin to believe they were the masters of nature itself? This is the essence of hubris. It is not merely pride. It is a defiant arrogance that forgets the source of its strength. The Atlanteans, once the stewards of the sea, began to view themselves as its owners. They looked upon the world beyond the pillars of Hercules and saw not a mystery to be respected, but a resource to be conquered. The 10 kings, who once gathered in the temple of Poseidon to uphold justice and honor their sacred oaths, began to look at one another with suspicion and greed. The rituals became hollow. The sacrifices, once a sign of humility, became a display of opulence. The pillar of orichalcum, inscribed with the laws of their ancestors, was still there, but its words were no longer written on their hearts. Imagine the atmosphere in the final days of this great empire. The streets of the capital, once filled with the sounds of philosophy and art, were now heavy with the weight of military preparation. The docks, which once welcomed peaceful traders from distant lands, were now the birthplace of a terrifying war machine. The ships of Atlantis, those marvels of maritime engineering, were no longer built for discovery, but for domination. They turned their gaze toward the Mediterranean, toward the young and virtuous city of Athens and the other nations of the East. They sought to enslave all the peoples who live within the pillars, from the sands of Egypt to the hills of Greece. This shift was not sudden. It was a slow erosion. In the quiet halls of the palaces, the whisper of greed grew louder than the call of wisdom. The people of Atlantis, who had once lived in harmony with the divine, now lived for the gratification of their own desires. They had become a society that knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. The shimmering walls of red, white, and black stone no longer reflected the glory of the gods, But the vanity of man, the mysterious orichalcum, which had once been a symbol of a unique heritage, was now just another tool for war. Plato uses the story of Atlantis to explore a profound question. What happens to a nation when it loses its moral compass? For him, Atlantis was a warning. It was a mirror held up to his own city of Athens, which he saw struggling with its own temptations of empire and power. But the story has resonated for 2,000 years because it touches on a universal human truth. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Atlanteans had everything. They had mastered the earth, the sea, and perhaps even the forces of the stars. They had created a utopia that was the envy of the world. But in their search for more, they lost the very things that made their life worth living. Their hubris was a sickness of the soul, a fever that blinded them to the looming catastrophe. As they prepared for their great invasion, the world around them began to change. Some modern theorists suggest that the environmental impact of their advanced technology may have played a role in their downfall. If they were truly harnessing the power of the earth or using sophisticated energy sources, could they have inadvertently triggered the very disasters that eventually claimed them? Imagine the tremors felt in the deep places of the island, the strange patterns in the tides, the restless behavior of the animals. Were these the warnings of a nature pushed to its limit? Or were they, as Plato claimed, the signs of divine wrath? The gods, he writes, so the state of his once honorable race. Zeus, the god of gods, who rules with law and sees all things, perceived that they were in a wretched state and decided to inflict a punishment upon them. He gathered all the deities into his most holy habitation, which, being placed in the center of the world, beholds all created things. And when he had assembled them, he spoke. The text of Plato's dialogue breaks off there, leaving the speech of Zeus to our imagination. But the message is clear. The balance had been tipped. The harmony that had sustained Atlantis for millennia was broken beyond repair. The society had reached its breaking point. It was a civilization at the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss of its own making. The shadow of hubris had grown so long that it eclipsed the sun. Think of the irony. The most advanced people in history, the masters of engineering and art, were undone by a flaw as old as time. They had built a world of metal and stone, but they had failed to fortify the walls of their own character. The expansion of the Atlantean Empire was a display of sheer, terrifying force. Their armies marched with a precision that was almost otherworldly. Their chariots, clad in bronze and tin, moved like a glittering wave across the plains of Libya and Europe. They believed themselves invincible. After all, who could stand against the heirs of the sea god? Who could resist the technology of the Golden City? They have forgotten that the strength of a nation lies not in its walls or its weapons, but in the justice of its cause and the virtue of its people. This was the great lesson of their conflict with Athens. According to Plato, the ancient Athenians, though far less advanced in technology and wealth, possessed a purity of spirit that the Atlanteans had long since discarded. The war was not just a battle of armies, but a clash of ideals. It was a struggle between a bloated, arrogant empire and a small, virtuous community. In the end, it was not the Athenian swords that defeated Atlantis, though they fought with legendary courage. It was the weight of Atlantis's own sins. The breaking point had been reached. The tension between their divine heritage and their mortal greed had snapped. The earth itself seemed to recoil from their presence. We must wonder, as we look back through the centuries, how many other civilizations have stood at this same crossroads? How many times has a shadow of hubris darkened the gates of a great city? Atlantis is the archetype of the fallen paradise, the ultimate cautionary tale. It whispers to us across the ages, reminding us that no matter how high we build our towers, they rest upon the fragile foundation of our collective morality. In the quiet of the night, we can almost hear the echoes of the last days of Atlantis. The hushed conversations in the markets, the anxious looks toward the sea, the frantic rituals in the temples that no longer brought comfort. The people must have felt that something was wrong. Even in their arrogance, they must have sensed that the world was no longer in their control. The golden statues of Poseidon remained silent, their winged horses frozen in a perpetual charge, unable to save the city they guarded. The great canals, the pride of their engineering, were now channeled for the rising waters that would soon swallow them whole. Tonight, as we reflect on the civilization at its breaking point, we are reminded of the fragility of our own world. We live in a time of staggering achievement, where we have touched the stars and mastered the secrets of life itself. But the shadow of hubris still haunts us. The story of Atlantis asks us to look at our own reflection. Are we using our power for wisdom or for greed? Are we building a legacy that will endure? Or are we, like the Atlanteans, treading a path that leads to the abyss? The enigma of the lost world is not just a mystery of location or technology. It is a mystery of the human heart. It is a story of how the very things that make us great can also lead to our undoing if we lose our way. The Atlanteans were at the pinnacle. They were the most advanced, the most powerful, and the most beautiful civilization the world had ever seen. And yet, they fell. They fell not because they lacked the intelligence to survive, but because they lacked the wisdom to thrive within the limits of the natural and divine order. As the sun set for the final time on the shimmering walls of the capital, the breaking point was finally crossed. The silence of the coming night was about to be broken by a sound that would echo through history, the sound of a world ending in a single day and night. The shadow had finally consumed the light, and the empire of the sun was about to become a ghost of the sea. We must carry this warning with us as we continue our journey. For the fall of Atlantis was not just a natural disaster. It was a spiritual collapse. It was the moment the dream became a nightmare and the utopia became a tomb. As we prepare to look at the final cataclysm, let us remember the lesson of the shadow. It is in the moments of our greatest triumph that we are often in the greatest danger. The Atlanteans, for all their brilliance, forgot this simple truth. And in their forgetting, they ensured that they would be remembered forever, not for their life, but for the spectacular, haunting silence of their death. The maritime majesty, the golden temples, and the impossible technology were all about to be lost, leaving only a whisper in an ancient tale and a question that haunts the dreams of every seeker of the unknown. How could something so great be lost so completely? Perhaps the answer lies in the shadow itself, the shadow of a pride that reached for the stars but forgot the ground beneath its feet. Imagine the sun dipping below the horizon of the Atlantic for the very last time, casting a long, golden shadow across a city that believed itself eternal. For the people of Atlantis, this was a day like any other, a day of commerce, ritual, and the quiet hum of a civilization at its peak. The markets were likely filled with the scent of rare spices. The canals bustled with ships returning from distant lands, and the great walls of orichalcum glowed with a fiery, unearthly light in the fading sun. There was no warning in the wind, no sign in the stars that by the next dawn this entire world will be nothing more than a memory, a ghost haunting the deep. This is the moment we have all wondered about, the hinge of history where myth and reality collide with devastating force. Tonight, we stand on the shores of that lost empire to witness the night the earth trembled and the sea rose to reclaim its own. Plato tells us that the end came in a single day and night of misfortune. It is a phrase that lingers in the mind, suggesting a catastrophe so sudden and so absolute that it defies our understanding of how great nations fall. Usually, empires crumble slowly over centuries of decay and decline. But Atlantis was different. Its end was a violent punctuation mark, a cosmic reset that erased every trace of its existence. What would it have been like to be there, in the heart of the concentric rings, when the first tremor shook the ground? Perhaps it began as a subtle vibration, a rattling of fine pottery in the villas, a nervous stirring among the horses in the stables of the Temple of Poseidon. In a city built on such intricate engineering, where water and land were perfectly balanced, the slightest shift in the earth would have felt like a betrayal. As the tremors intensified, the architectural marvels that defined Atlantis would have become its greatest dangers. Imagine the massive bridges spanning the rings of water, built with stones of red, white, and black, beginning to crack and groan under the strain. The great walls, once a symbol of impregnable defense, would have shuddered as the very foundation of the island began to fail. Plato speaks of earthquakes and floods, a twin terror that suggests a tectonic event of staggering proportions. If Atlantis sat atop a volcanic hotspot or major fault line, as many modern theorists suggest, the eruption would have been cataclysmic. The sky would have turned a bruised purple, then a suffocating black, as ash and smoke choked the air, turning the midday sun into a pale, ghostly orb. In the temples, the priests of Poseidon surely gathered, desperately offering sacrifices to the god they believed was their father and protector. They would have looked up at the colossal golden statue of the sea god, commanding his chariot of winged horses, and wondered why the earth was turning against them. Was it truly divine wrath, a punishment for the hubris and greed that had supposedly corrupted their virtue? Or was it simply the indifferent power of the planet, shifting its weight and crushing everything in its path? The sound must have been deafening, a roar from the depths of the earth that drowned out the screams of the city. The beautiful gardens, the gymnasiums, and the palaces were all being reclaimed by the tremors, falling into the fissures that opened like hungry mouths in the soil. Then came the water. For a maritime civilization that had mastered the oceans, the sea was their lifeblood, their source of wealth and power. But on this night, the ocean became their tomb. A tsunami, triggered by the massive seismic shift or the collapse of the island itself, would have approached with a terrifying speed. In the dark of the night, the only warning would have been the sudden, eerie withdrawal of the tide, leaving the harbor floor exposed and the ship stranded in the mud. Then, a wall of water, hundreds of feet high, would have loomed on the horizon, a dark, unstoppable force moving through the moonlight. It would have crashed over the outer walls, surging through the canals and overtopping the concentric rings with a power that no engineering could withstand. The great submersion was not just a flood, it was the island itself losing its battle to stay afloat. Plato describes the island sinking into the abyss, becoming a shoal of mud that blocked the passage of ships beyond the Pillars of Hercules. This suggests a massive geological subsidence, a literal vanishing act where the landmass settled into the sea. Imagine the final moments of the central city, the royal palace and the temple of Poseidon, as the water swirled around the gleaming pillars. The orichalcum walls would have sparkled one last time beneath the waves before disappearing into the cold, dark pressure of the Atlantic. The pride of 1,000 years, the knowledge of 1,000 generations, all sinking into a silence that would last a millennia. Why does the specific image of a single night of destruction resonate so deeply with us? Perhaps because it speaks to a universal fear, the realization that everything we build, no matter how advanced or how magnificent, is ultimately at the mercy of the world we live on. Atlantis represents the peak of human achievement, and its destruction serves as the ultimate reminder of our fragility. In our modern world, where we believe we have conquered nature with our technology and our cities, the story of Atlantis acts as a haunting shadow. It asks us if we are as secure as we think, or if we too are just one day and night away from becoming a mystery for future explorers to solve. Some scholars point to the eruption of Thera around 1600 before the Common Era as the real-world inspiration for this tale. That eruption was one of the largest in human history, 4 times more powerful than the explosion of Krakatoa. It sent ash as far as Egypt and triggered tsunamis that devastated the coast of Crete, effectively ending the Minoan civilization. When we look at the ruins of Akrotiri on Santorini, buried under meters of volcanic ash, we see a world of beautiful frescoes and advanced plumbing that was cut short in an instant. It is easy to see how such a tragedy could have been passed down through the centuries, growing in the telling until it became the legend of a lost continent. But for those who believe in a literal Atlantis, Thera is just a small echo of a much greater catastrophe that occurred far out in the dark waters of the Atlantic. As the dawn finally broke over the site where Atlantis had once stood, there would have been nothing left to see. No smoke, no ruins, just a vast expanse of churning, muddy water. The ships that had been out at sea, returning with their cargoes of gold and silver, would have arrived to find their home gone, vanished as if it had never been. One can only imagine the horror of those sailors, staring at an empty horizon where a glittering metropolis had stood only 24 hours before. They would have carried the story to every port in the Mediterranean, whispering of the day the god grew angry and the earth swallowed a paradise. Over time, the location would be forgotten, the details would blur, and the history would harden into a myth. This great submersion left a void in the heart of human history. If Atlantis was truly the center of a global network of knowledge, its disappearance would have felt like the lights going out across the world. The survivors, scattered to Egypt, the Americas, and the Mediterranean, would have been the keepers of a fading flame, trying to rebuild in a world that had suddenly become much darker and more primitive. This is why we see similar patterns in pyramids, in astronomy, and in flood myths across disconnected cultures. They are the fragments of a broken mirror, reflecting the light of a sun that set long ago. As you listen to the rhythm of the waves in your mind, think of the silence that followed the sinking. The ocean is a vast keeper of secrets, a place where time moves differently and the past is preserved in the cold and the dark. The night the earth trembled was the end of a world, but it was also the beginning of an enigma that has refused to die. It is a story told in the quiet hours, a reminder that under the surface of our history lie mysteries that we have only begun to fathom. The great submersion was not just the end of a city, it was the birth of a dream of a lost golden age that we are still searching for today. Was it the weight of their own ambition that sank them, or was it a cosmic accident, a random shifting of the crust? Plato leaves us to wonder, providing just enough detail to make it feel real, but enough mystery to keep us guessing. The image of the island sliding into the deep is the ultimate metaphor for the transient nature of power. Even a civilization that rivaled the gods could not survive the turning of the earth. As we move forward in our journey, we will look closer at the clues left behind, the whispers in the mud and the echoes in the stones of other ancient lands. But for now, we linger in the quiet of that final morning, where the Atlantic waves roll over the place where empire once shimmered in the sun, leaving nothing but a legacy of wonder and the haunting question of what might still be waiting for us in the abyss. Imagine for a moment, somewhere beneath the waves, a crystal lies dormant. For 9,000 years, it has waited in the darkness. The energy it once contained has not dissipated. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. It waits. It resonates at a frequency so low that only the deep ocean can hear it. Imagine that one day, perhaps in the distant future, we will find it. We will understand at last what the Atlanteans knew. We will stand before a technology so advanced that it seems like magic, and we will ask ourselves, how did we forget? The mystery of Atlantis endures because it speaks to something deep within us. It is the memory of greatness lost. It is the possibility of wisdom recovered. It is the eternal human desire to understand our own forgotten past and to learn from it. The ocean keeps its secrets, but it does not keep them forever. Some mysteries we will eventually solve. Others will remain mysteries forever. But as long as we continue to ask questions, to seek knowledge, to explore the unknown, we honor the spirit of inquiry that gave rise to Atlantis in the first place. Let your mind wonder about what lies beneath. Let yourself drift toward dreams of golden cities and glowing crystals, of knowledge preserved and wisdom remembered. The deep listens, the mystery continues, and the search goes on. Sleep well, seekers of truth. May your dreams be filled with wonder, until we meet again in the shadows of history. The night is peaceful, the story endures, and somewhere, beneath the waves, the ancient city keeps its watch. Good night.